I'm Eva Pilgrim. Thanks for streaming with us. The jury seeing a different side of one of the government's key witnesses in the Sean Diddy Combs trial as she faced cross-examination today.
Welcome back to Rachel Reveals. Let's get straight to it. Day 20 of Diddy's trial just took a sharp turn. His ex-girlfriend, who we refer to as Jane Doe for privacy, was back on the stand, and this time the defense went on the attack. They brought the receipts, texts, gifts, trips, and moments that painted a very different picture than what we heard before. Jane said she felt used. The defense says she was willing. And the courtroom tension hit a boiling point. From the moment Jane Doe sat down for cross-examination, it was clear. This wasn't going to be soft or sympathetic. The defense came prepared, and their strategy was simple: flip the narrative. They didn't just question Jane. They used her own words, text messages, voice notes, and memories to paint her not as a victim, but as a willing participant in Diddy's lifestyle.
Jane was also questioned about a trip she took with Combs to Turks and Caicos and a voice note she sent him. It said, "I had so much fun with you."
One message read, "I had so much fun with you," referring to a trip they took together. Jane had previously claimed she wouldn't have gone if she knew certain people would be there. But now, the defense was showing the jury a version of Jane who planned those nights, invited guests, and even coordinated the details. And then came the comparisons. The trio that included Jane, Diddy, and one of his trainers reportedly called themselves the Trifecta, likening themselves to Kobe, Shaq, and Michael Jordan. The defense used that nickname to argue that this wasn't coercion. It was collaboration. Jane said she was doing it to make Diddy happy. But the defense pressed. If she didn't want any of this, why was she setting it up? Why was she still sending affectionate messages? And why was she telling Diddy how much she enjoyed it? It was clear. The goal wasn't just to challenge her story. It was to dismantle her credibility, piece by piece, and show the jury a version of Jane who was not manipulated, but in control. And that's just the beginning. I've been following every twist of this trial, but nothing hit quite like this. Jane Doe, who just days ago had been breaking down on the stand, crying through her testimony, came back with fire in her eyes during cross-examination. And the defense? They zeroed in on one thing. What did she get out of this relationship? They brought up the big house in LA, the designer gifts. And then, the moment that stopped everything. Did you get a Chanel bag? Jane didn't even flinch. She looked straight at the attorney and said, "No, I only got trauma." It was sharp, personal, and completely unfiltered. But the defense kept going. They asked about another bag, a Bottega Veneta, and that's when it escalated. Jane leaned in and snapped, "What does my body cost?" Her voice didn't shake. She meant it. In that instant, the whole courtroom felt it. I wasn't there, but the reporters described it like the air got sucked out of the room. The judge had to step in and remind her to answer the questions directly. But the damage, or maybe the impact, was already done. And this wasn't just about handbags. This was about control, about value, about whether the jury would see her as a woman who was preyed on or someone who was negotiating her place in a twisted relationship. But here's the thing that made me stop and really think. This wasn't the Jane we saw during direct examination. That Jane was quiet, shaken. She barely looked up. But under cross, she transformed. She locked eyes with the defense. She fought back. And from the outside, that can be a double-edged sword. On one hand, it shows strength. But on the other, the defense used it to imply she wasn't fragile. She wasn't manipulated. She was calculated. After that exchange, Jane asked for a break. And honestly, I don't blame her. That wasn't cross-examination anymore. That was a reckoning. If there was one thing the defense came armed with, it was the receipts. And I mean pages of them. They pulled up text after text, conversations between Jane and Diddy, and even messages where she was coordinating private nights with other people involved. The defense wasn't just poking holes in her story. They were trying to dismantle it, brick by brick. One of the texts that hit hardest? Jane wrote that when they were intimate, Diddy would say he never wanted to leave. She described him as loving, affectionate, even said she felt cared for. And in that moment, it felt like the entire foundation of the prosecution's narrative started to shift. I sat there thinking, wait, is the defense turning Jane into a character witness for Diddy? Because that's exactly what it felt like. She talked about how he asked about her feelings, how he supported her business ideas, and how he wanted her to feel safe. Not exactly the image of a manipulative abuser the prosecution had presented just days earlier. Even the infamous house, yes, the one Diddy paid for, was framed as something she wanted. Not a trap, not a tool of coercion. Just a private, luxurious alternative to hotel rooms where they could be together without public scrutiny. And let me tell you, the defense leaned into that hard. They brought up her influencer income, around $50,000 from Instagram, plus 2 successful brand deals. The argument? She wasn't financially dependent on Diddy. She had choices. But here's where it gets tricky. Jane didn't deny those messages. She said she was trying to make Diddy happy, that she wanted to feel loved, that she wanted his attention. And honestly, that kind of vulnerability is real. But it also opens the door for the defense to argue that what happened wasn't trafficking. It was just a messy, toxic relationship. The prosecution may try to recover from this, but in the eyes of the jury, those texts might have done more damage than any cross-examination ever could. By now, you've probably asked the same question I did. If Jane's story is this complicated, what does that mean for the case? Here's the thing. The prosecution knew this wasn't going to be clean. They never claimed Jane was perfect. But what they are banking on is something bigger than one witness, a pattern. During direct testimony, Jane admitted something that stopped me cold. She said when she read Cassie's lawsuit, the one that started this entire legal avalanche, she felt like she was reading her own story, word for word, page after page. Now pause right there. These are 2 women who don't know each other, different timelines, different backgrounds. But somehow, they're describing nearly the exact same behavior from Diddy. That's not coincidence. That's a pattern. And that's exactly what the prosecution is trying to show. This is where the racketeering charge, the RICO, comes into play. It's not just about individual acts. It's about proving that there was a system, a structure, a repeated method of control, manipulation, and exploitation that spanned years and involved multiple women. And Jane? She's just one piece of it. Because it's not just her. It's Cassie. It's Mia. It's Abana. It's the others. The prosecution is stacking these stories like dominoes, each one reinforcing the next. Alone, maybe they could be brushed off. But together, they start to feel undeniable. That's the part the defense can't cross-examine away. You can poke at Jane's credibility all day. But if Cassie's story matches, and Mia's echoes the same, and the patterns keep repeating, that's when the jury starts seeing something deeper. And honestly, that's when Diddy's defense starts running out of places to hide. So here's where things stand now. After a day like that, you'd think the defense would want to rest. But no, they're just getting started. From what I'm seeing, they're gearing up to call their own witnesses, not just to deny what Jane said, but to create distance between Diddy and everything she described. We're talking assistants, bodyguards, maybe even household staff, people who were there but supposedly saw nothing. The strategy is clear. Show that nothing illegal or non-consensual ever happened. That everything Jane talked about, it either didn't happen at all or it happened behind closed doors, and no one around Diddy knew a thing. But here's the problem, and honestly, it's one the defense doesn't seem ready for. You can fill the stand with people who say, "I didn't see anything." That's fine. But silence isn't a defense. Just because no one noticed abuse doesn't mean it didn't happen. And more importantly, most of these witnesses are still close to Diddy. Some of them probably owe him everything. That doesn't exactly scream unbiased. And remember, this jury just watched Jane go from crying on direct to fiery on cross. They've seen how emotionally charged this case is. If the defense brings in someone cold, dismissive, or too polished, it could backfire hard. Because here's what I've learned watching high-profile trials like this. Juries don't just listen to facts, they feel them. And when a woman gets up there and says, "I only got trauma," that lands. When she says, "What does my body cost?" that lingers. And if the defense thinks it can clean all that up with a few bland denials and a bodyguard who shrugs on the stand, I've got news for them. The jury's already watching the bigger picture. This next phase could be the most dangerous one yet, for both sides. What's happening inside that courtroom is one thing. But let's not pretend this trial isn't being fought outside the courthouse too, on social media, in group chats, and on every trending page across the internet. As soon as Jane's testimony hit the news, the internet exploded. People weren't just talking about the case, they were dissecting every word she said. Her clapbacks about trauma and body cost? They're already viral. TikTok is flooded with edits. Twitter's running polls asking if she's being real or rehearsed. And YouTube? It's already filled with side-by-side breakdowns comparing Jane's story to Cassie's, frame by frame. And don't even get me started on the search spikes. Right after the trial, searches for Bottega bag price skyrocketed. People are Googling the Mann Act. Others are literally asking, "Who is Perry Mason?" after the judge dropped the name in court. And yes, Diddy telling the sketch artist she made him look like a koala bear? That's a meme now. It's everywhere. But here's why this matters. This case isn't just being decided by 12 jurors anymore. Whether anyone wants to admit it or not, public opinion is shaping the narrative, and that puts pressure on both the prosecution and the defense. Because when millions of people are watching and forming their own conclusions, every word, every facial expression, every text message matters more than ever. And honestly, that may be Diddy's biggest problem right now. In federal court, there are no cameras, no public live stream. So the only version of this story the world sees is the one told by the women who take the stand. And after what Jane said in court, the world's not looking away. After Jane's explosive cross-examination, it might seem like the defense scored big. But let's be real, the prosecution isn't done, not even close. Jane was never the whole case. She's just one piece of a much bigger puzzle. And if you've been paying attention, you know the prosecution is building a pattern. Jane's story overlaps with Cassie's. And if even one more woman comes in and backs that up, it's game over for the defense's strategy. And here's what makes it dangerous for Diddy. The next witnesses might not come with the same emotional baggage. No contradictions, no blurred lines, just straight-up testimony that says, "He did the same thing to me." That's the part the defense can't control. And that's why this trial is far from over. So where does that leave us? Jane's testimony cracked the courtroom wide open, raw, emotional, and messy. But this case was never just about one woman. It's about a pattern, a system. And whether the jury believes that what Jane described wasn't just personal, it was planned. The defense made their move. Now it's the prosecution's turn to hit back. And trust me, I'll be right here watching every second of it. Thanks for watching Rachel Reveals. Don't forget to subscribe, because this trial, it's just getting started. See you in the next one.